Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we're in our off-site recording studio to bring you another picture's worth 1,000 words. For today's video, we'd like to thank Andy, who has digitized many of the pictures in the museum's collection. There's many more to go through, but he's done a fantastic job of going through several collections, specifically collections that show not just New Jersey, but also some of our sister ships, which allows us to then send them the scans. For today's collection, we've got some really interesting pictures of New Jersey and Missouri having gun barrels swapped out. Missouri in the late 1950s, New Jersey in probably 1984. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but yes, we have already scanned these and sent them to Missouri, and there are far more pictures than we're showing in this picture's worth 1,000 words. We're going to go through 4 of the pictures in the set, but there's probably about 10 times that many. These pictures were labeled as found on board. We did a video not that long ago where we talked about what this means and the difference between found in collections, objects that were donated to the museum and we lost the paperwork, and found on board, objects that we found on the ship. They came to the museum with the ship. They don't have a donor. Well, the donor is the U.S. Navy, just like the rest of the ship. But that would be a huge database entry. Anyway, we unfortunately don't have any context beyond that. Where were they? Were they in one of the gunnery reference libraries? Were they in the log office? Was it mislabeled? Oftentimes, curatorial staff does not know the difference between found on board and found in collection. If you find it in the collection space, you have found it on board. But these pictures show replacing gun barrels on board. We've talked about this in the past. Originally, as built, the Iowa-class battleships could fire about 300 full-service rounds per barrel before the rifling would be worn away. The Iowa-class could fire about 300 full-service rounds per barrel before the rifling starts to be worn smooth, and they'd have to pull the entire barrel out and then bore out that old rifling, put in a new rifling sleeve, and then put the barrel back into the inventory. Now, fortunately, most navies would make extra barrels when they built their ships so that you could change them out a few at a time. Fortunately, barrels being long lead items, the barrels for Illinois, Kentucky, and some of the Montana-class battleships were already in the inventory. So the Navy had pretty much a full spare set of barrels on top of the 36 that were already on the Iowa-class. Following the Korean War, the Iowa-class battleships were starting to get close to their maximum barrel life. Now, all the barrels fired more than 300 rounds. However, many of those were training rounds that had less powder behind them, and therefore they eroded the barrel lining less. And so they kept meticulous records of how many of each type of shell, how much powder and everything was fired, so they could math out how much life was left in the barrel. So by the mid-1950s, after the Korean War, they decided to start rebarreling all of the Iowas. This only happens at that time because later on, during the Vietnam War and then in the 1980s, the U.S. Navy develops chemical packets that they could put with the powder that when the powder exploded would basically coat the inside of the barrel, and that would help reduce the wear. However, there's one instance of an Iowa-class battleship getting a new barrel after the 1950s that I'm aware of, and that was New Jersey in 1984. During the Vietnam War, the most fired barrel was the center barrel of turret 2. It seems like they started just about every firing mission using that barrel. That may be because it is the centermost barrel of the group, so it's the one that's going to go towards the center of the average of where they're going to land. And that's the best guess we have as to why that particular barrel is fired first. But it means that that barrel received many more rounds than other barrels. Now, as we've talked about in other videos, as the rounds go through the barrel, there's so much friction that it's actually pulling the lining out the end of the barrel as it's flattening the rifling and elongating it. So periodically, you have to use a special lathe that you attach to the end of the turret, and each battleship would have carried one of these lathes, at least one. We've found at least one on New Jersey so far. And then you would use that to cut the lining off that's projecting from the barrel. The reason you need to do this is because the rest of the barrel is protecting that thin, soft lining. So once it's projected out, especially with a shell going through it, it's under so much strain that it's likely to crack. And once that rifling cracks outside of the barrel, that crack is then going to travel into the barrel, and at that point you got to pull it and reline it regardless of how many shells have been put through it. So when New Jersey was reactivated in 1982, it was found that the center barrel of turret 2 had one of these cracks in it. That gun essentially was not fired during early training and while the ship was during her first active deployment, her shore bombardment of Lebanon, which went from late 1983 to early 1984. This means that the barrel that's in the center barrel turret 2 was never fired in anger on New Jersey. The one that was there was likely one of the ones that was relined from one of the other Iowa-class battleships. New Jersey has had 19 total barrels in her life. There are, of course, the 9 currently on the ship. There were the 9 that we carried during World War II in Korea, which the museum has tracked down. And then there's the one that was removed. And we haven't done the research on that one's serial number to find out where it came from. And we believe that it was cut up for scrap after it was removed. The barrels that were still good were held in various arsenals, West Coast, East Coast. There's some at the Dahlgren Proving Grounds. They're all over the place. But, and if you'd like to see us do a video in the future on where all of our known barrels are, we've done one a long time in the past, but we can redo one if you're interested. We've got 10 times as many viewers now as we had back then. Let us know in the comment section down below. Anyway, the one barrel's missing. We believe it was cut up for scrap because they didn't reline barrels anymore at that point. We don't use guns that big. And with the life of these barrels being infinite and having a nearly full set for all the ships already, there's no way it was saved. Anyway, this massive preamble is just to show you 4 of the pictures from this collection, and we'll show others over time. Part of why I'm talking so long here at the beginning is I don't know the exact process or what many of these tools are called, but here's picture 1, and picture 1 is really cool because it explains picture 2, which confused me for the longest time. So you can see that center barrel turret 2 is hooked up to this crane, and it's sitting on this big cart that's on the deck. And you can see, if you're looking at the deck, right under the foot of the guy who's standing there looking up, they've covered the deck in plywood, so they're not going to damage that teak deck. And they've got this, it's not quite scaffolding, it looks like a prefab platform there. I don't know if this was something specifically made for rebarreling, and it's got like this special sled on the middle for the barrel to sit on, or if it's just like, yeah, Long Beach had some prefabbed pieces of scaffolding that they used for supporting gangways and stuff while ships were in dry dock or in the yard there. I'm not entirely sure. Future research. But you can see, and I'm not sure if this is the barrel they're pulling out or putting it in. There's no writing on the back that explains it. But you can see that there's this big structure built on the port side of the main deck. And you can see that the barrel, or you can see that the turret has been rotated, I don't know, 70 or 80 degrees off of centerline to port to get it over this structure. She is currently tied up starboard side to the pier, with the port side being to the harbor, which we'll be able to see in a later picture. So this brings me to picture 2. This picture is really cool because this is right outside of where my office is today. That little OBA box there, that is right at my office door. So why the heck is there a picture of my office? There's actually 2 or 3 in this set. in this photo series of replacing the gun barrels. In the 1950s set of rebarreling Missouri, there's no equivalent picture of the inside of the ship. There's some pictures inside the turret, but not like random second deck passageway. Why is this picture here? The answer is the thing in the picture that doesn't show up in the passageway nowadays. It's the big, I don't know, it's at least a 6x6, maybe an 8x8 piece of lumber. And you can see it's got wedges between it and the overhead, and it's sitting on a board on the tile deck. That deck is 1.5 inches thick, and it's got some significant framing there to hold it in place. But you're putting a 120-ton gun barrel on it, on top of whatever the weight of that cart was we saw in the last picture, that scaffolding. So they're adding this additional support there to make sure it's not too much weight on the deck. Again, this doesn't show up in the pictures of Missouri, which I assume they were using during this process for reference. And if we assume that these pictures were found on board the ship, then likely they were kept as references in case they ever had to do this again, because, oh yeah, World War II, even in the 1950s, this was something we did all the time. 1980s, it wasn't. This is the only gun barrel we're aware of being swapped out past the 1950s on a battleship. So there is a very limited number of people who worked in the shipyard in the 40s and 50s who still have this expertise in the 80s. And those guys are not around nowadays. If they were still around, they got laid off back in, what was it, mid-90s when Long Beach shut down. So one of the complications of reactivating the Iowa-class battleships today. But that's beside the point. So clearly, either they read some document or had some knowledge that said they had to do this that's outside the pictures that we have, or one of the engineers was just like, hey, we're about to put X number of tons on the deck here. Oh, and by the way, that deck doesn't run from side to side because there's a barbette in the middle, and the deck isn't attached to the barbette, so there's like a little bit less strength there where we need it the most. So, oh yeah, we got some 8x8s down here, let's go and put that in. Anyway, just a cool picture because I can look at my office door. There are like no pictures of that part of the ship in service. This is the closest one. Here's another picture that shows some interesting supports. And again, I'm not entirely sure if this is something that's like prescribed or if it's something that they're figuring out in the 80s as they're relearning how to do this. Here you can see we're in the gun pit of Center Barrel Turret 2, and they've welded several I-beams into the gun pit. And the last time I was in there, you can see those weld marks where they were installed and then cut off again. And you don't see those in any of the other gun pits, which leads me to believe that when they reline the barrels in the 50s, they don't do it this way. Now, why specifically they need this extra structure, I'm not sure if they're then welding pad eyes to it for some of the chain falls and things they're using. I'm not sure if it's to stand on, because the gun pit is like this 30-foot deep pit, or if there's some other reason for it, but obviously they thought it was easier to bring these rather large steel I-beams in and weld them in place and then cut them out again than to not have them. And finally, our fourth picture, and here we've got a really great picture. I have no idea where it's taken from because it's over the bow of New Jersey and off to the side in over the harbor. So I don't know if they're on another ship or if there's a building back there because we're looking towards land. Oh, and you can see a Spruance-class destroyer in the top left corner. So what we're looking at here is the Titan crane, better known as Hermann the German, which was a war prize the United States took from Germany and had in Long Beach until the mid-90s when the shipyard was shut down. Then we sent it to Panama, and it's still in use down there in Panama. We didn't take it back when we turned over the canal zone. So this one's cool because we've got both gun barrels on the barge structure that Herman the German floats on, sitting there waiting to be picked. So the first barrel has been pulled out and the second barrel is waiting to go in. And one of the barrels is, if you zoom in there, you can see that it's hooked up to the crane here, which likely means that the photographer is not sitting in a bucket suspended from the end of the crane. Although we learned while we were in dry dock that these cranes do have multiple hooks on them, multiple pick points, and the further out you go, of course, the lighter they can pick, and of course it looks like they're picking the barrel from the one that's closest to the base. It's interesting to me that they've got the turret turned to port, but they've got the crane on the starboard side of the ship, so the crane is picking up the barrel, lifting it over the turret, and then sliding it in. So that's just interesting to see. Or rather, setting it onto that scaffolding, and then they're using chain falls or whatever to pull it in. Some of the other pictures in this series show some of that going on. So I really glossed over the pictures. In this picture's worth 1,000 words. Did you guys see anything interesting in them that I didn't cover? Let us know in the comment section down below. Maybe we'll bring it up when we talk about other pictures in this series in the future. I think it's a really, really cool story of why they needed to do this, and the fact that they did this, they were able to, between finding people with the expertise and just using the expertise of the various engineers and workers in Long Beach, they were able to replicate this process that likely hadn't been done for 30 years. Just a really cool part of the story of bringing back these old ships and continuing to use them in the modern Navy. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate Andy's support in scanning these for us. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the ongoing restoration efforts of the battleship. Some of your support is going towards preserving historic material like this, getting the equipment and the time for staff to go through these photos, scan them, look at them, and put them out to the public. So we really appreciate that support. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.